Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm here as the spoiler. I'm going to talk a little bit about counter-marketing lessons learned from the Truth Campaign and the anti-tobacco movement, which is a movement that spanned over 100 years, and what lessons there might be for food and alcohol. And before I begin, to state the obvious, we can go without alcohol and live, and we can go without tobacco and live, but we can't go without food. So that's a premise from the beginning. There, I'm drawing some analogies, but obviously the ultimate analogy, there's clearly a difference. I'm going to start by just drawing some analogies between the marketing practices that have been banned, like Joe Camel over here, and those that are still alive and well, like this is how you get a Coke Light in Italy. It's always displayed this way, at least so far as I have seen. This is a new beer that was created and is very popular now in France, but elsewhere it's a Molson Core product from UK. It stands for animation. It's a pink beer marketed especially to young girls. This is a brand of Camel that was launched about 5 or 6 years ago with a massive campaign to increase the market share of the use of Camel cigarettes by girls, a brand that had been pretty male-dominated beforehand. We had a wonderful opportunity with this because John Pierce and his colleagues in Southern California have been doing a longitudinal study of adolescents, and were able to measure the impact of this campaign isolated from everything else that was going on young girls, and it produced a 10% increase in brand affinity for girls and no change in brand affinity for boys. Again, the Coca-Cola ad against a very popular, extremely popular, for those of you who are in the age metric, form of vodka called Skinny Girl. Again, marketing the products around the concept of management of weight, done consistently by the tobacco industry for decades and decades, being done, of course, by the soda industry as well as by the alcohol industry. Before we show this ad, I want to set it up just a little bit. To me, this is the most objectionable ad I have ever seen, which is why I've not only shown it here, but I showed it at the Rudd Center in terms of the food space. But I want to explain why, because actually it looks like a motherhood and apple pie kind of ad, but it certainly is not such an ad. And right now, my team back at Legacy are trying to collect the media buy and the placement for this particular ad. I did notice 3 nights ago when I saw the ad again that there is now a different version of the ad airing. I don't know if any way I played a small part in it. I sent the ad to the White House with a note about the ad. I've talked to people who recently left the White House and have a very strong role in terms of obesity policy about this ad. But this is an example of what all of those who have spoken before about self-regulation, if this is okay, then something is terribly wrong. And one of the reasons this ad is okay is I believe when I get the buy back, I learned something today, it's a family buy. And in a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit more about family buys, because the tobacco industry is very big on family buys for all their ads about what a wonderful industry they are. And those ads are, frankly, been very effective. So let's see this ad from Tyson's Foods.
I don't like tuna salad, lima beans, or casserole. Mushrooms look like aliens.
Spinach? Not a big fan.
They just look like dirty socks. I don't like any of those stuff.
Tyson chicken nuggets. They're crispy on the outside, juicy on the inside, made with 100% all-natural ingredients.
More, please.
They're the one thing kids love, 100% of the time.
Thanks, Mom.
It probably goes without saying what's unique about this ad, but essentially what's unique and sets it apart is its unselling vegetables. In addition to selling its own product, it is literally unselling one of the fundamental things that kids need. And my guess is when we get the media buy, which I'd be happy to pass on to all of you, it's essentially a family media buy. And a family media buy means it's shown during shows when both kids and parents are sitting together. Some of you may remember the Philip Morris campaign called Talk They'll Listen, which was a campaign ostensibly designed to convince parents to talk to their kids about tobacco use so that their kids would not use tobacco. For a variety of reasons, that ad went off the air. It was studied very intensively by a global group of tobacco researchers and found to be associated with increased use of tobacco, precisely because it appealed to the type of kid who was most likely to smoke to drive them in the direction of smoking as opposed to the opposite direction. It is a global problem. I'm sure I'm not telling you something you don't know, but this is the kid eye level of the cereal department in a small town in Italy. And I don't have time to show you all the pictures, but I have a picture that shows the entire row. And so the entire row at the level of about 4.5 feet from the beginning of the cereal row to the end of the cereal row is all cereals with added chocolate. So you'll see these all have chocolate. Everything to the left has chocolate. Everything to the right has chocolate. So what is it about targeting youth? I'm here to talk about the largest social marketing campaign, second only to the ONDCP anti-drug campaign that has ever been launched and sustained in the US, and that is the Truth Campaign. The Truth Campaign is very unique. If you want to learn more about it, go on the website, go online, put in truth ads, and you'll see all kinds of them. They're quite startling. Our first one piled 1,200 body bags around Philip Morris's downtown headquarters in New York City. It was attention-grabbing in many respects, as was the rest of the campaign. Eventually, we were in litigation, which I'll talk about in a moment. But one could imagine, and when I recently spoke to a board of a nonprofit that was made up largely of presidents of corporations, I said, I'm going to show you now an ad that would be your worst nightmare. And I showed the body bags ad, and they said, you want to know something? That is our worst nightmare. So that ad could legitimately occur piling 500 body bags up around a multinational food company. And it wouldn't really be lying at all if you look at the number of people who die just in the US alone every day from obesity. So right now, the tactics that are being utilized in relation to the communication between us as a nation and big food and the food industry have been, I think, constrained, polite, and so on and so forth. But there are other directions that theoretically they could go. And in a sense, I'm trying to set up, well, what would that look like and why might that eventually be necessary? And I'll start with the bottom line. One of the reasons it might be necessary, if none of what we've heard about today has any impact on the obesity epidemic, which is continuing to grow, and all of the associated epidemics with it, with an estimate, as many of you I think know from the World Health Organization, that by 2030, the chronic disease epidemic, which is fueled by not solely but principally poor food, that in fact will be the leading cause of death globally, not infectious disease. So that would be a real turnaround. There's extensive formative research that companies like alcohol companies and tobacco companies and food companies do to find their perfect segment and space and understand what impact they're having on their consumer. We heard some of that today. The food industry can do this very openly because they do not have some of the same problems that alcohol and tobacco have. But by the same token, clearly if we see a lineup of the most popular cereals and we see that the bottom threshold for sugar content is, I think I heard 33%, we know we have a huge problem despite all of the voluntary efforts that are ongoing, and probably a problem that voluntary efforts alone will not fix in the foreseeable future. One of the classic ways that the tobacco industry gets information that they theoretically are not allowed to have access to anymore is by having their own anti-tobacco efforts. And so they developed a survey called the Teen Attitude and Behavior Survey that called thousands of homes and spoke to thousands of teenagers without parental consent. And I thought it was very ironic that the name of the survey was TABS. So they were keeping tabs on all of our teenagers, and they were, of course, using this information solely to help young people quit smoking. And for a variety of reasons, it is very unlikely that that is the sole reason and the sole purpose, and may in fact be unrelated to what the goal was of that particular survey. Brands are a means of self-expression for kids. They're extremely important for young people. Locking in brand identity actually largely happens between 12 and 17. So just as an outsider coming from the tobacco wars, hearing that 12 is our cutoff and we're probably not going to get 12 to 14 or 12 to 17, that is quite scary to me. And that does raise to me the notion, and I can't remember exactly who said it, but someone today said we must have a large national counter-marketing campaign to address food to be a countervailing force. And I think that that is probably true, and it should be funded by a variety of mechanisms, and it should be independent of the influence of the food industry. And without that, I do think we will continue to have very, very serious problems. We will have no counterweight. The Truth Campaign, which of course was financed through the Master Settlement Agreement between the State's Attorneys General and the tobacco industry, created a foundation, and one of the mandates of that foundation was to undertake a public education campaign. In a minute, I'm going to talk about some of the impacts of that campaign, but let me give you the bottom line price tag. Just in the first 4 years, it cost over $500 million. So we're not talking about chump change for a paid national media buy. It's extremely expensive to do. It may be becoming less expensive because of the influence of internet. When that campaign was launched, 90% of teens got their information from TV. That's now changed. 90% of them get their principal information through the internet. Tobacco industry has some of the best known brands. The same, I'm sure, would happen if you were looking at certain types of cereal. Joe Camel was recognized at 55%, 95% of 8th graders recognized Joe Camel, 55% knew Marlboro Man. In the mid-1990s, Mickey Mouse was equally known as was Joe Camel by 5-year-olds. The tobacco industry, now I'm going to get into their tactics. So let's listen to the tobacco industry's tactics and ask ourselves, are these tactics that are an issue with the food industry? And if they are, then we have to come up with strategies that address them. Framing the issue. The tobacco industry frames smoking as a personal choice, and it pushes that very, very hard. It doesn't talk about what it really is, a very powerful addiction, and some argue the most powerful addiction. The food industry can follow this lead, and it's unhampered by issues such as secondhand smoke, because smoke not only harms the person who's smoking, it harms those that are around them. This argument dampens the public will to enact policy because they see it as a personal choice. It's not a structural problem. They co-opt influential organizations, and an example here is the American Dietetic Association. I apologize for calling them out, but many people have pointed out to me that they are in fact part of the problem and are analogous to, say, the National Restaurant Association, which has been in lockstep coordination with the tobacco industry for a very, very long time, despite the fact that studies clearly demonstrate that smoke-free restaurants do just as well, if not better, in fact, in most studies, than those that are not smoke-free, but they refuse to embrace this research. So what else does industry do in order to be allowed to continue doing bad things unfettered? As with tobacco, food, and alcohol, industry executives are involved in shaping relevant policy. They are stakeholders. They are at the table. Sometimes they're so far at the table, bullet number 2 is that they're actually writing the regulations that are being developed. So that makes them, in a sense, bad actors. For a variety of reasons, government officials may value business interests over public health, and we all know that the Supreme Court wrote a big blank check in terms of their ability to further lobby and elect individuals with the recent Supreme Court decision. They influence, big business has a tendency to influence the science and perception of science in the tobacco industry because of the millions of pages of disclosed documents, has the richest place to go and learn about this. At the Legacy UCF Documents Library, there is no analogous document set for alcohol or food. If there were ever litigation that unleashed these documents, we might find some very, very, very surprising documents, as have been found in some of the big pharma cases. Studies sponsored by the food industry are biased in favor of the industry, per a recent article, fairly recent article in the American Journal of Public Health, and a similar article, the alcohol industry now pursuing similar tactics. What are the tactics? Funding research projects, selecting for those research projects people who have no business doing the research in the first place because they have no track record, putting together advisory committees to select the grantees and having no one on the advisory committee have any background whatsoever in the field. You know, I could go on, but there's a wonderful article by Hirshhorn if you want to read it, so just Google his name and read that just on tobacco alone. It's an extraordinary article. Tobacco industry gives significant sums to communities. They were the first ones up in line to give money to women's groups and to minority organizations. And the foundation that I head up will not fund an organization if it's taking money from the tobacco industry within the unit of our award. And I will tell you that policing that has been very difficult for us, and I've had some very heated discussions because people do not like to be told that it's not okay to take $1 million from Philip Morris for positive youth development. They're in the business of addicting adolescents and subsequently their ultimate demise. So, you know, if you play hardball like that, you can imagine you have some fairly interesting conversations. These actions of buying off, you know, the dance, the theater, you know, every cultural group, I'm not going to name too many names because I'll not get out of here in one piece, but it's a long, long list of people who take money from very strong corporate interests and who are expected to be kind in return. Is the food industry following suit? My own foundation almost competed for a grant from a major food manufacturer, and someone in this room, and he knows who he is, stopped us from doing it. I think it was probably a good call. Buying trust among consumers. The tobacco industry really undertakes campaigns to make themselves look very, very good. I'm sure that the same is true when you look at the alcohol industry's campaign about responsible drinking. If you turn off the words that are being said, some of the alcohol industry's responsible drinking ads look like ads for alcohol use, to promote alcohol use. They really do not at all look as if they're intended to denormalize over drinking. So what are the effects of these various food and alcohol messages? A quote here: if consumers' demand for food were to reflect what they need to maintain a healthy weight, the market would contract. That's a quote from a very well done paper by Kelly and by Ken Warner, and it's true. And the same is true for the tobacco industry in a different way. The tobacco industry is over if kids stop smoking. If kids stop smoking, it is game over for the tobacco industry, and they know it. YAS is young adult smoker. It's a euphemism for teens, in case you didn't pick it up. Okay, so the Truth Campaign. The Truth Campaign used a mass media approach to educate consumers, and as I described to you, in its first years, spent an enormous amount every year in order to achieve its objective. It was a brand that competed head-to-head with the Joe Camels of the world. It talks to teens in their own voice and does not talk down to them and asks them, you make a decision about whether you want to be sucked into this. It highlights the actions of the tobacco industry, and as you can imagine, they did not care to be highlighted. We were in litigation with them for 5.5 years, and $17.5 million later, we won unanimously in the Delaware Supreme Court. Why did we win? Because the campaign was based on scientific evidence. It worked. The industry had to admit in court that they agreed that we had not misrepresented the facts. That did not help them one little bit. So the importance of keeping what you do factual is highly important. The impact of the campaign, and I have no doubt in my mind that the same impact could happen with a similarly designed and financed campaign around binge drinking, a similarly designed and financed campaign about increasing vegetable use among whatever segment, you pick your segment. 75% of all youth in the U.S. can still describe a truth ad. At its zenith, 90% could. 22% of the overall decline in smoking was attributable and isolated to that campaign. 4 years in, nearly 500,000 young people had not started solely as a result of that campaign, and it over-delivered to minority youth, especially African-American youth. What else do you do? Publish in peer-reviewed journals. You expect and prepare for litigation. I've just described it. If you really play hardball, like you ban 16-ounce sodas in New York, you will go to court. If you put a label that shows people, real people, dying of tobacco-related causes on a cigarette pack, you're going to go to court. You're going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and you might lose on the following grounds: compelled commercial speech. How dare you make us say something on our own product against our own product, even if it's true? So we live in an unusual time and interesting times. Pressure the industry to drop inappropriate public relations efforts. We've heard about some today. As far as I'm concerned, if you are going to be on a panel and you're talking about the massive changes that you're implementing, you have a collective, not an individual, but a collective obligation to prove that it's having an impact. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, your effort, your money. Is it window dressing, or is it having a substantive impact? That is an extremely important question that must be answered. Thank you very much.